moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Klaus Buchner. He is a former professor at Technical University in Munich and a former member of the European Union Parliament. Dr. Buchner has investigated the health impacts on people living in close proximity to mobile phone masts or cell towers in Germany. Today, he will be speaking to us about what we knew about the health risks of living close to mobile phone towers prior to the 5G rollout. And he will also share the results of pertinent German-based studies. Dr. Buchner, I'm glad that you are here with us. Thank you so much for joining. And I would like to hand over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I want to repeat that I am talking now about the effects before the introduction of 5G. When a transmitter of radio frequency radiation starts operation, most of the people don't feel anything. Only about 5% get headache and memory, concentration problems, sleep disorder, and so on, the things you can see on the sheet. The difficulty is that these are quite general symptoms, and it's extremely difficult for a doctor, for a medical doctor, to connect these problems with radiation. And that's really for the affected people a problem. Usually they are not acknowledged that it's an effect of radiation. As Professor Hadel said, it's usually considered as a psychological problem. I want to mention another problem, which is very important, that is attention deficit syndrome and attention deficit hyperactivity syndrome. May I have the next picture, please? This syndrome is very much connected with a hormone called phenylethylamine, short PEA. And this is affected very much by radiation. We did an experiment, or let's say better, an observation in a very lonely valley in the Bavarian forest. And before we had practically no radiation. And then a cell tower was erected with, compared to today's values, also very weak radiation. We had a group of up to 30 microwatts per square meter, and the highest one with 100 microwatts per square meter. What happened, you can see on this picture. Immediately before the operation started, the urine and the blood of 60 people was scanned, and the values you see on the left-hand side, these points on this curve. The red curve is the highest radiation, more than 100 microwatts per square meter. The green one below, the lowest radiation. You see, in the first half year, between the first measurement and the second half a year later, only the highest radiation caused some decrease of PEA. For the other lower levels, there was practically the same value. But then after half a year, the values decreased dramatically. And you need to know that PEA is closely connected with attention deficit syndrome and so on. If we have not enough PEA, then we observe such deficit syndromes. And you cannot replace PEA, let's say, by pills or by injections. The body will not accept this. But you can apply some compound which is similar in structure, not in chemistry, and this is Ritalin. You need to know that in the last decades, the use of Ritalin has been 80-fold of that what it was in the 1990s. So it's quite dramatic effect, clearly not only caused by radiation, but radiation is one of the reasons, definitely. As was said before, we quite often hear radiation, non-thermal radiation, cannot do any biological effect because it's too weak. It cannot break up chemical compounds. It cannot do any other things. Sorry, I have just a short problem with my computer. Now it's done. But it's not necessary to change the chemistry in the first step. We can show this most easily with the physiology of the cells. Cells are a part of practically all living organisms, and the cells are usually covered, enclosed in a membrane. In this picture, it's blue. Outside the cell, you have positive potentials, here depicted by calcium ions, the yellow dots. And inside, you have negative potential. And you can imagine the calcium ions want to go into the cell in order to combine with the negative charges. But they can't penetrate the cell membrane except for special holes, which we call calcium channels. And usually these channels are closed. They're closed because if calcium enters the cell does specific reactions. If it's a nerve cell, then it's creating a nerve impulse. If it's a muscle cell, then it's a contraction of the muscle, and so on. But the point is, only a certain amount of calcium ions enter the cell, not for a long time very many. What happens if electromagnetic radiation is applied? Then we have to look how these calcium channels are closed. They're closed by proteins with a complicated structure. Each of these proteins has 4 helices. May I have the next picture, please? One further. Yes, thank you. These helices have not equally distributed charges. So these charges attract, positive and negative charges attract, and keep the helix in form. If you apply some radiation to it, then the helix starts vibration, torsion vibration. And if the vibration is strong enough, then the positive and the negative charges lose contact and the helix loses its stiffness. It has some more or less arbitrary form. This is important for the calcium channels. The next slide, please. As I said before, the holes, the calcium channels, are closed by a complicated protein with 4 helices. Here I have depicted only 2 of them. The lower part is outside the cell. It's positive calcium particles, inside negative chloride, essentially. And when you apply radiation to it, then we see in the next picture, please. The next one, please. The next one, please. Yes. Then the helices have no longer their stiffness. The calcium ions can pass through, but the point is, these radiation effects are not only for a short time and not only for a certain part, but for all of these cells. So very much calcium enters the cells. And this has two effects. First of all, the calcium level outside the cells goes down, which has in extreme cases also a very bad effect for the human being. But inside, the calcium ions make a lot of chemical reactions. And the most important one is that they create very aggressive combinations, so-called free radicals. And they attack the DNA. And the effect of this attack is, first of all, that cancer is created. Cancer, you have seen the effect by the lecture of Professor Hadel. And the second thing is that the genetics is changed. You can see it with the babies. When I say it, sorry, I forgot to mention before, the effect here of the torsion vibration is only one of several effects which open the calcium channels. Maybe the best the best discussed is the motion of some proteins besides the calcium channels, and they open the channel mechanically. That was calculated very precisely by Professor Panagopoulos. So I want to stress it's only one of several mechanisms which I was discussing just now. Now let's go back. If this happens, then we have cancer, which was discussed already, some effects on the next generation, and third, cell death. And cell death is shown here in the example of some trees. On the left-hand side of the picture, you see an antenna, and the main beam goes to the direction of the trees, and this part of the trees which is dead. But the right tree has some parts which is still alive, not very nicely, but still alive. There, it's outside the main beam of the antenna. And this picture is important for me because it shows it cannot be the acids in the rain. It cannot be pollution. It cannot be lack of water or anything else, because one and the same tree is partly dead, where it's irradiated, and partly alive, where the radiation is weaker. The other effect I want to show is the effect on the next generation. We had the occasion by a German law which requires each farmer to have a digital record of all its animals. That means, for example, here we had a pig farm with 27,700 observed piglets, and we have fantastic number of data because we have the record of all the properties of these piglets. Before the operation of cell tower, just 300 meters away of this farm, we had very low radiation. It was below 1 microwatt per square meter. And these are not by some amateurs. These are official data by the German government. And after the operation, we had quite low radiation as compared to present situations. We had 600, 700, 800 microwatts per square meter, peak values 1,200 microwatts per square meter. please remember the limit proposed by IGNIT is 4.5 million microwatts per square meter. So 1,200 as compared to 4,500. The effect was terrible because the fertility of the pigs went down tremendously, so much that the farmer got financial problems. But for me, the most worrying thing was that we had many defects, abnormalities. Please remember, we had 20,000, slightly more than 20,000 piglets with low radiation. And within these 20,000, we had 7 abnormalities. And only of 2 types, hermaphrodites or piglets without anus. Of course, the last one died very quickly. But after the operation of the antenna, we had 70 visible abnormalities in 7,700 piglets. So we had not only visible abnormalities, of course, also abnormalities of internal organs. But for the visible ones, we had completely new ones. Some of them are depicted in this sheet here. It's a frightening effect for me, is that we had almost 0.8% of deformations in these piglets. You must know that biologically, pigs are quite similar to human beings. That is not only limited to animals and to farm animals. We have on the next slide some calves. The calf on the left picture has died one day after the photo was taken. It died of deformations of internal organs. We have also quite good statistics from insects, from animals, where the rate of propagation is much faster, of course, than with these animals. So it is shown in a large variety of animals that this non-thermal radiation, old type GSM radiation, 4G radiation, sorry, no, I don't need this. This changes the genetics. This is a terrible effect for our next generation, of course. So please remember, we have to do something now. We are responsible for the next generation. And there is still democracy with us. We can change laws. We can vote for parties which are willing to change these things. Because we must remember, if we sleep in a democracy, we shall wake up in a dictatorship. Please act. Thank you.
Very, very much, Dr. Buchner, for this great presentation, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation later on the panel.